He had come to town for just two things: nails to fix his broken fence and coffee to keep him awake during long nights. $3 jingled in his pocket, all the money he had left after a year of bad crops and worse luck. Cole tied his horse outside the store and wiped sweat from his forehead. That's when he heard the shouting. A crowd had gathered near the old saloon, their voices loud and rough. Curiosity pulled Cole toward the noise. He pushed through the crowd until he could see what was happening. A fat man with a greasy mustache stood on a wooden crate, waving his arms like he was selling a prize pig. But what stood beside him made Cole's stomach twist. A young girl, small and thin, with black hair tied messily behind her head. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground as the men around her shouted numbers. "Look at her, gentlemen. Strong back, good worker," the auctioneer yelled, grabbing the girl's arm and holding it up like she was a piece of meat. "She's Japanese, but she understands enough English to follow orders. Do I hear $1? Laughter rippled through the crowd. A miner with dirty fingernails spat on the ground. "I'll give you 50 cents for the little rat," he called out. More laughter. The girl, Hana, didn't move. She didn't cry. She just stood there like she had disappeared inside herself. Something hot and angry bubbled up in Cole's chest. He wasn't a rich man. He wasn't even a particularly kind man. But seeing people treat a human being like a broken tool made his hands curl into fists. The auctioneer sighed. Going once at $1. Going twice. Before he could think, Cole heard his own voice ring out. $2. The crowd went quiet. All eyes turned to Cole. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. "Well now, Mr. Mercer. Didn't know you were in the market for a servant." Cole didn't answer. He pulled the two wrinkled bills from his pocket and held them out. The auctioneer snatched the money and shoved the girl toward Cole. "She's all yours. No returns." The crowd laughed again as Cole turned away, Hana following silently behind. He could feel people staring as they walked back to his horse. Cole untied the reins and turned to Hana. "Can you ride?" She didn't answer, just looked at the ground. Cole sighed. "All right then." He lifted her onto the horse like she weighed nothing at all, then climbed up behind her. As they rode out of town, Cole could still hear the men laughing. The sun was low in the sky by the time Cole's ranch came into view. The fields were brown and dead. The fence around the property leaned like a drunk man. The house needed paint and the barn needed repairs. It wasn't much, but it was his. Cole helped Hana down from the horse. She stood stiffly, waiting for instructions. "You can stay in the bunkhouse," Cole said, pointing to the small building near the barn. "It's empty. Needs cleaning, but it's got a bed." Hana nodded once, quick and sharp, like a bird pecking at seed. Cole rubbed the back of his neck. He'd never owned a person before. Didn't even believe in it, truth be told. "I ain't gonna. I mean, you'll work, sure. But not like." He trailed off, not knowing how to say what he meant. Hana's dark eyes flicked up to meet his for just a second before dropping again. In that quick glance, Cole saw something that surprised him. Not fear, but calculation. Like she was figuring him out. "Right," Cole muttered. "Well, there's a pump out back for water. I'll bring you some food later." As he walked to the house, Cole wondered what in the world he had just done. $2 for a silent girl, and a whole lot of trouble, most likely. He glanced back and saw Hana still standing exactly where he'd left her, as still as a statue in the fading light. Night fell quietly over the ranch. Crickets began their evening song as Cole carried a plate of beans and bread to the bunkhouse. He knocked lightly before pushing the door open. The sight stopped him in his tracks. Hana had already swept the dirt floor clean. The single cot had been made up with fresh straw. And on the small table near the window sat a perfect little origami bird, folded from a scrap of paper Cole recognized as an old grocery list. Hana stood by the window, watching him with those dark, unreadable eyes. Cole set the plate down carefully. I'll see you in the morning." As he closed the door behind him, Cole Mercer realized two things. First, that he had absolutely no idea what to do with this strange, quiet girl. And second, that for the first time in years, his lonely ranch didn't feel quite so empty. The wind rustled through the dead fields as Cole walked back to the house, unaware that his life, his land, and his heart were about to change forever. $2 had bought him much more than a worker. It had bought him a new beginning. But beginnings are often difficult, and this one would be no exception. The real story of Cole Mercer and Hana was just about to unfold, and neither of them could possibly imagine where it would lead. The moon hung high over Cole Mercer's ranch, casting long shadows across the dry, cracked earth. The bunkhouse door creaked as Cole pushed it open, revealing a small room thick with dust. Spiderwebs clung to the corners, and the wooden floorboards groaned underfoot. "This is where you'll stay," Cole said, gesturing to the narrow cot in the corner. "It ain't much, but it's got a roof." Hana stood just inside the doorway, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't speak, didn't nod, just stood there like a ghost in her faded blue dress. Cole scratched the back of his neck. "There's a wash basin out back. Water pumps near the barn. Don't use more than you need, wells running low." Still, Hana said nothing. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. The wind rattled the loose shutter on the window. Cole cleared his throat.
"Right. Well.
Good night, then." He closed the door behind him, leaving Hana alone in the dark bunkhouse. Back in the main house, Cole lit a single candle and sat at the rickety kitchen table. The flickering light made the shadows dance across the walls. He rubbed his tired eyes and wondered, not for the first time, what he had gotten himself into. $2. That's all she had cost him. 2 crumpled dollars for a girl who wouldn't even speak. He'd bought chickens that made more noise. Cole blew out the candle and lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the night, the wind in the dead grass, the distant howl of a coyote, the creak of the old house settling. Then another sound. Scratching.
Digging. Cole sat up.
The noise came from outside, near the bunkhouse. He pulled on his boots and grabbed his rifle just in case. Moonlight painted the yard silver as Cole stepped outside. At first he saw nothing. Then movement caught his eye. Hana knelt in the dirt behind the bunkhouse, her small hands clawing at the hard earth. She worked methodically, digging shallow holes with her fingers, then reaching into a tiny cloth pouch tied around her neck. From it, she took pinches of something seeds, Cole realized, and placed them carefully in each hole before covering them back up. "What are you doing?"
Cole asked.
Hana didn't startle, didn't even look up.
"Just kept planting."
Cole crouched beside her. "You're wasting your time. Nothing grows here anymore. Not without rain." Hana's hands stilled for just a moment. Then she continued her work, patting the dirt over another seed. A cool breeze rustled the dry grass. Somewhere, a night bird called. Cole sighed and stood. "Suit yourself." He turned back toward the house, shaking his head. $2 wasted on a girl who planted seeds in the dark like some kind of fairy tale. As he climbed back into bed, Cole tried not to think about how carefully Hana had handled those seeds, like they were precious jewels instead of whatever dried-up things she'd brought with her. He tried not to think about the way her fingers had trembled just a little as she covered them with dirt. Most of all, he tried not to think about the strange feeling in his chest when he'd seen her there, kneeling in the moonlight, planting hope in dead ground. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the cracks in the walls. Somewhere, a loose shutter banged against the house. Cole closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the night, the wind, the coyotes, and beneath it all, the soft, steady scrape of Hana's hands in the dirt. Morning would come soon enough. Then they'd both see what, if anything, could grow in such barren soil. The morning sun had barely risen when Cole Mercer stepped outside, his boots crunching on the parched earth. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and stretched, his back popping after another night on his lumpy mattress. The usual worries filled his mind before his feet even hit the ground. The dying crops, the empty water barrels, the broken fence on the north pasture. Then he saw it, behind the bunkhouse, where just days before there had been nothing but cracked, lifeless dirt, now stood dozens of tiny green shoots. They pushed bravely through the soil, their delicate leaves unfolding toward the sunlight. Cole blinked hard, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. He stumbled forward, his calloused hands hovering over the fragile plants as if afraid they might disappear. The earth around them looked different too, darker, richer somehow, though no rain had fallen. A movement caught his eye. Hana stood by the water pump, her small frame silhouetted against the pink dawn sky. She carried her drinking bucket carefully, not spilling a single drop as she walked toward the miracle plants. Cole watched in silence as Hana knelt beside her garden. She began to sing, her voice so soft it might have been the wind through grass. The words were foreign, but the tune felt ancient, like something the earth itself might remember. As she sang, she poured water slowly around each plant, her fingers brushing their leaves with impossible gentleness. The ranch hands gathered nearby, their usual morning chatter replaced by uneasy whispers. "That ain't natural," Old Tom muttered, scratching his scruffy chin. "Witchcraft," agreed young Billy, making the sign of the cross. Cole ignored them. He stepped closer to Hannah's garden, noticing something strange. The ground here felt cooler underfoot. The air smelled different, fresh and alive in a way nothing had smelled in Dry Gulch for years. Hana didn't look up as Cole approached. She continued her quiet song, her hands moving steadily between the plants. "These yours?" Cole asked, gesturing to the sprouts. Hana paused her singing but didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her faded apron and pulled out a small, round radish. It glowed pink in the morning light, its skin smooth and unblemished. Cole took it hesitantly. He hadn't seen a vegetable so perfect since before the drought began. When he bit into it, the crunch echoed in his ears. Juice burst onto his tongue, sweet and sharp at the same time. It tasted like childhood summers, like memories he'd almost forgotten. The ranch hands gasped as Cole devoured the entire radish, dirt and all. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, staring at Hana with new understanding. "You did this," he said, not quite a question. Hana met his eyes for the briefest moment before turning back to her plants. But in that glance, Cole saw something that made his breath catch. Not magic, but knowledge. A deep, quiet understanding of growing things that went beyond what any farmer in Dry Gulch had ever known. As the sun climbed higher, Cole found himself kneeling beside Hana, learning how to water the plants without drowning them, how to check for bugs without crushing the tender stems. The ranch hands shook their heads and wandered off to their chores, but Cole stayed. By afternoon, the story had spread to town. By evening, folks began arriving at the ranch gate, peering curiously at the green shoots behind the bunkhouse. "Just luck," Cole told them, though he didn't believe it himself. That night, for the first time in years, Cole dreamed of rain. He woke to the sound of Hana singing to her plants in the moonlight, her voice weaving through the darkness like roots through rich soil. And in the morning, there were more sprouts. The morning sun beat down on Cole Mercer's ranch as he stood watching Hana work in her ever-expanding garden. What had begun as a small patch behind the bunkhouse now stretched nearly half an acre, bursting with vegetables that had no business growing in drought-stricken land. The air smelled of rich earth and growing things, a sharp contrast to the parched fields beyond the garden's edge. Cole wiped sweat from his brow just as the sound of approaching horses made him turn. 3 riders came up the dusty path, their fancy clothes and polished boots marking them as town men, not ranchers. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man with a waxed mustache, wore a silver star pin on his lapel that caught the sunlight. Cole recognized him immediately. Mr. Donovan, owner of the Rocky Ridge Mining Company. Well, Donovan said, reining in his horse just feet from where Cole stood. "If it isn't Cole Mercer and his famous Japanese garden witch." His smile showed too many teeth. Hana's host stilled in the dirt, though she didn't look up. Cole saw her knuckles turn white around the wooden handle. Donovan dismounted, his 2 companions following suit. "Heard some mighty interesting stories about your little farmhand here," he continued, tipping his hat toward Hana. "Seems she can make things grow where nothing ought to." Cole shifted his weight, planting his boots firmly in the dirt. "What do you want, Donovan?" The mining boss chuckled, pulling off his leather gloves one finger at a time. "Straight to business." "I like that." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a crisp $50 bill. "We've got hungry men down at the mines. I'm here to buy your girl." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Behind Donovan, one of the men licked his lips, eyes fixed on Hana in a way that made Cole's stomach turn. Before Cole could respond, pounding footsteps interrupted them. Little Tom Higgins, the general store owner's son, came running up the path, his face red and sweaty. "Mr. Mercer," the boy gasped, skidding to a stop. "Ma's sick real bad, Doc says. Doc says only fresh greens might help her." Tears streaked through the dust on the boy's cheeks. Hana was already moving. Without a word, she knelt among her plants, her hands moving swiftly as she selected leaves and roots, placing them gently in a small basket. Cole watched as she added several purple flowers he'd never seen before, their petals velvety soft. Donovan snorted. "Don't waste your magic weeds on some shopkeeper's wife, girl. You're coming with. She's not for sale." Cole's voice cut through the mining boss's words like a whip crack. Hana stood and pressed the basket into young Tom's shaking hands. The boy clutched it to his chest, his eyes wide. "Boil the leaves into tea," Hana said softly, her first words to anyone but Cole since arriving at the ranch. "Make your mother drink it all." Donovan's face darkened. He stepped forward, the $50 bill crumpling in his fist. "Now listen here, Mercer. That girl's worth 10 times what you paid. I'll give you one last chance to." The sound of a rifle being cocked echoed across the yard. Cole hadn't realized he'd grabbed his gun from where it leaned against the fence, but now the barrel pointed straight at Donovan's chest. "I believe I said she's not for sale." For a long moment, no one moved. A grasshopper buzzed past Cole's ear. Somewhere in the garden, a bee hummed among the flowers. Finally, Donovan smirked and held up his hands. "No need for dramatics. But mark my words, this isn't over." He turned on his heel and mounted his horse in one smooth motion. His companions followed, though one kept looking back at Hana with hungry eyes until they disappeared down the road. Young Tom Higgins stood frozen, the basket clutched tight against his chest. "Thank you," he whispered before turning to run back toward town. Cole lowered the rifle, his hands steady despite the anger still coursing through him. He turned to Hana, expecting to see fear in her eyes. Instead, he found her watching him with something like approval. Without a word, she returned to her hoeing, the steady scrape of metal through dirt the only sound between them. But as Cole went to put his rifle away, he noticed something new in the garden, a patch of unfamiliar plants with thorns as long as his thumb, their leaves a deep, warning red. They hadn't been there yesterday. The sun climbed higher as Cole went about his chores, but his mind kept returning to Donovan's visit. $50 was more money than he'd seen in years. Enough to fix the roof, buy new seed, maybe even get a proper irrigation system. Yet when he pictured Hana being dragged off to the mines, her quiet magic forced to feed greedy men who'd never appreciated, something inside him burned hotter than the midday sun. As evening fell and the first fireflies blinked to life above the garden, Cole found himself standing at the edge of Hana's thriving plants. She knelt among them, humming that strange, soft song. Without looking up, she held out a single perfect strawberry, impossible this early in the season, and Cole understood. Some things weren't meant to be bought and sold. Some miracles came with roots too deep to dig up. That night, for the first time, Cole left the bunkhouse door unlocked. And when he checked later, he found it slightly ajar, as if someone might come and go as they pleased. He smiled to himself and went to bed, listening to the sounds of the night, the crickets, the wind, and beneath it all, the quiet rustle of plants growing where nothing should. The moon had barely risen when Cole Mercer jerked awake to a sound like rolling thunder. But the sky outside his window remained clear and starry. The thunder came from hoofbeats, many of them pounding up the ranch road at full gallop. Cole was out of bed in an instant, his boots hitting the floorboards as he grabbed his rifle from its place above the door. Through the window, he saw flickering orange light dancing across the yard.
Torches.
"Last chance, Mercer," a voice bellowed from the darkness. Donovan's voice. "Send out the girl, or we'll burn this place to the ground." Cole's heart hammered against his ribs as he threw open the door. The scene before him made his blood run cold. At least a dozen men on horseback circled the yard, their torches casting long, leaping shadows. Donovan sat at the center, his face twisted in a cruel smile. Before Cole could speak, movement caught his eye. Hana stepped silently from the shadows beside the house, her small frame barely visible in the torchlight. But what she held in her hands gleamed sharp and deadly, two long gardening knives, their edges honed to a razor's edge. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a strange scent from Hana's garden, something spicy and sharp that made Cole's nose tingle. The horses snorted and tossed their heads, their ears flattening against their skulls. One reared up, nearly throwing its rider. Donovan cursed and spurred his horse forward. "Enough of this," he shouted, thrusting his torch toward Hana's garden fence. "If we can't have your magic, nobody will." The moment the flame touched the wooden post, something extraordinary happened. The fire didn't catch the dry wood. Instead, it raced up Donovan's sleeve like a living thing, engulfing his arm in blue-tinged flames. The mining boss screamed, a high, panicked sound that sent his horse bolting in terror. He beat at the flames with his other hand, but they only spread faster. His men stared in horror as Donovan rolled from his saddle, thrashing in the dirt. "Devil plants!" one of the men shrieked, his eyes wild. "The witch has cursed us." Hana stood perfectly still, her knives lowered now. With her free hand, she reached into the pouch at her belt and withdrew a pinch of some glittering powder. As the wind picked up again, she let it sift through her fingers, the particles catching the moonlight like tiny stars. The effect was immediate. The remaining horses went mad, bucking and screaming as their riders fought to control them. One by one, the men turned and fled, leaving Donovan still rolling in the dirt, his shirt sleeve now just smoldering ashes. Cole finally found his voice. "Hana, what did you?" But she was already walking toward the whimpering mining boss. With a swift motion, she scooped up a handful of damp earth from her garden and pressed it against Donovan's burned arm. He gasped as the pain seemed to ease instantly. "Go," Hana said, her voice quiet but firm. "Never come back." Donovan scrambled to his feet, his face pale with terror. He didn't even look at Cole as he stumbled after his retreating men, clutching his strangely healed arm. The night fell silent again, save for the distant sound of fleeing horses and the ever-present chirp of crickets. Cole lowered his rifle, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Hana stood watching the road long after the riders had disappeared. Moonlight silvered her profile, making her look both very young and impossibly ancient at the same time. Cole opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. The powder, the fire, the healing dirt. None of it made sense, and yet he looked at Hana's garden, where even now strange new plants were unfurling leaves in the moonlight, their shapes unfamiliar. "Guess we'll need to build a better fence," Cole said at last, his voice rough. Hana turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the stars. For the first time since she'd arrived, Cole saw the ghost of a smile touch her lips. Together, they walked back toward the house, the scent of growing things heavy in the night air. The storm had passed this one, at least, but as Cole glanced back at the garden, he knew deep in his bones that whatever magic lived there was only just beginning to wake. The real storms were still coming. And when they did, Cole suspected Hana's quiet power would be the only thing standing between his ranch and destruction. That night, as he lay awake listening to the sounds of the night, Cole made a decision. Come morning, he would teach Hana to shoot. Because some threats couldn't be stopped with gardening knives and mysterious powders. Some dangers required good old-fashioned lead. And if Donovan was foolish enough to return, Cole intended to be ready. The moon dipped below the horizon as dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. In the garden, unseen in the half-light, new plants continued to push through the soil, plants with thorns like needles and leaves that shimmered like metal in the morning dew. Hana's quiet war had only just begun, and Cole Mercer, whether he liked it or not, had just become her most loyal soldier. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of ripe apples and wood smoke as Cole Mercer guided the wagon into town. Beside him, Hana sat straight-backed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The wagon bed overflowed with baskets of vegetables, herbs, and small cloth bags of seeds that people claimed could cure everything from insomnia to indigestion. 5 acres. Cole still couldn't believe it. What had begun as a few struggling sprouts behind the bunkhouse now covered more land than his best wheat field ever had. And every plant thrived under Hana's care, despite the ongoing drought that continued to plague their neighbors. The town square buzzed with activity as they arrived. Brightly colored banners flapped in the breeze, and the smell of roasting meat made Cole's stomach growl. But it was the reaction of the townspeople that caught him off guard. "There she is!" someone shouted. "The garden witch!" cried another. Within moments, a crowd surrounded their wagon. Hands reached up, not in anger or fear, but with coins and empty baskets, pleading for Hana's magical produce. "Please, miss, my boy's had a cough for weeks. These carrots cleared up my husband's gout in 2 days. My tomatoes have never grown so tall." Hana handled the attention with quiet grace, measuring out vegetables and seeds with careful hands. Cole watched in amazement as she accepted payment, making change without ever speaking a word. The mayor, a portly man with an impressive mustache, pushed through the crowd, a shiny medal in his hands. "Cole Mercer," he boomed, "for single-handedly saving our town from starvation." Cole felt his face grow hot as the mayor advanced. Without thinking, he stepped aside and gently pushed Hana forward. The crowd fell silent. The mayor's smile faltered. Hana stood frozen, her dark eyes wide. Then, from the back of the crowd, little Tom Higgins called out, "She gave me the tea that saved my ma." The spell broke. A cheer rose from the gathered townspeople. The mayor, recovering quickly, bowed slightly and pinned the medal to Hana's apron instead. As the festival continued, Cole noticed something remarkable. Children clustered around Hana's feet as she worked, their eyes wide with wonder. "Tell us about Japan," a freckle-faced girl begged. Hana paused, then set aside her measuring scoop. From her pocket, she produced a square of paper. As the children watched, her clever fingers folded and twisted until a delicate paper crane emerged. The children gasped as she set it in the little girl's palm. Cole leaned against the wagon, watching the scene unfold. The way the late afternoon sunlight caught Hana's profile. The way the children's laughter seemed to make her stand a little taller. The way the townspeople now looked at her not with suspicion, but with gratitude. By the time they packed up to leave, every last vegetable and seed had been sold. The wagon rode lighter on the return trip, though Cole's money pouch had never been heavier. Back at the ranch, as they unloaded the empty baskets in the fading light, Hana surprised him. "This good home now," she said, her voice clear and strong. Cole nearly dropped the basket he was carrying. They were the first complete English words he'd ever heard her speak. He looked around, really looked at what the ranch had become. The thriving gardens. The fat, happy chickens that laid eggs daily. The rain barrels that never seemed to run dry, no matter how long between storms. The way the very air seemed fresher, cleaner somehow. "You're right," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "It is a good home." That night, as Cole lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night, he realized something. He'd stopped questioning Hana's magic weeks ago. The inexplicable plants, the healing vegetables, the way animals gravitated to her, none of it seemed strange anymore. What mattered wasn't how she did it. What mattered was that she'd chosen to do it here, on this land, with him. Outside, the harvest moon cast its silver light over 5 acres of miracles. And in the bunkhouse, Hana lay awake, tracing the outline of her medal with one finger, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. The seasons would change again soon. Winter would come with its challenges. But for the first time in years, Cole Mercer went to sleep without worrying about what tomorrow might bring. Somewhere in the darkness, a paper crane sat on a windowsill, its wings catching the moonlight. And in the garden, unseen by human eyes, new seeds began to stir beneath the soil, dreaming of spring. The first morning of the new year dawned crisp and clear, with frost painting delicate patterns across the ranch house windows. Cole Mercer woke to an unusual sound, the quiet clink of china from his kitchen. He pulled on his boots and shuffled toward the noise, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Hana sat at his kitchen table, her hands folded neatly around a steaming cup of green tea. A second cup waited across from her, its earthy scent curling through the room. Between them lay a single sheet of paper, crisp and official-looking.
Cole blinked.
"Morning," he mumbled, sliding into the chair across from her. Hana pushed the paper toward him without speaking. The morning sunlight streaming through the window illuminated the bold black letters at the top. Deed. Cole's calloused fingers trembled slightly as he picked it up. His eyes scanned the legal language until they landed on the important part, the name. Not just Cole Mercer Ranch, as it had always been. Now it read Mercer and Tanaka Ranch. He looked up sharply. "Tanaka? That's your name?" Hana nodded once, her dark eyes watching his reaction carefully. "But how, when?" Cole stammered, turning the paper over as if it might explain itself. "The seeds," Hana said simply. "I save money. Pay lawyer." Cole stared at her, then at the deed, then back at her. Suddenly laughter bubbled up from his chest, loud and unexpected. He laughed until tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, until his sides ached. "I paid $2 for you," he wheezed finally, wiping his eyes. Hana's lips curved in that small, rare smile he'd come to cherish. "Now I pay you back with whole ranch." The truth of it settled over Cole like a warm blanket. All those seed packets sold at the Harvest Festival, all those special vegetables people paid extra for, Hana had been saving every penny. Not for fancy dresses or train tickets to someplace else.
For this.
For making the ranch truly hers as much as his. Cole lifted his teacup with both hands, suddenly afraid he might drop it. The warm ceramic felt solid and real against his palms. "To partners," he said hoarsely. Hana lifted her own cup and clinked it gently against his. "To home." That spring, they plowed double the fields. Hana walked the rows each morning, her fingers trailing over the soil as if listening to secrets beneath the surface. Cole followed behind, planting the seeds she handed him without question. Some looked strange, speckled, or oddly shaped, but he'd learned not to doubt her. When the drought returned with summer's heat, as everyone knew it would, something remarkable happened. While neighboring farms withered and died, the Mercer and Tanaka Ranch stayed green. Hana's special plants, the ones with deep roots and waxy leaves, seemed to share their water with everything around them. Travelers passing through would stop and stare, shaking their heads in wonder. "How do you do it?" they'd ask. Cole would just wink and nod toward Hana, humming as she worked among her plants. "Some things grow better together," he'd say. As the years passed, the ranch became known throughout the territory. Not just for its miraculous crops, but for the unlikely pair who tended them, the gruff rancher and his quiet Japanese partner. People came from miles around to buy their seeds, to taste their famous strawberries, to walk among gardens that defied explanation. And on every deed, every contract, every sack of grain they sold, the name remained the same: Mercer and Tanaka Ranch. $2 had started it all. But what grew from that small, unlikely beginning was something far more valuable than money could ever buy. It was trust.
It was partnership.
It was home. The seasons turned, as seasons do. The paper crane on Hana's windowsill grew yellow with age, but never lost its shape. Cole's hair turned gray, then white. The garden expanded year by year, its borders pushing ever outward. And every New Year's morning, without fail, 2 steaming cups of green tea waited on the kitchen table, one for Cole, one for Hana, to celebrate the day their lives became properly, wonderfully intertwined. The story of the $2 girl and the rancher who bought her became legend in those parts. But the truth, as truths often are, was simpler and more beautiful than the tales told about it. It wasn't about magic plants or lucky chances. It was about what can grow when one person sees value where others see none. It was about roots, deep and strong, put down in unlikely soil. It was about finding your place in the world, and the person who helps you recognize it as home. The afternoon sun hung golden over Mercer and Tanaka Ranch as Cole wiped his brow, watching the latest batch of travelers depart with their precious seed packets. 20 years had passed since that fateful auction day, though the memory remained fresh as morning dew. A cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, catching Cole's attention. An unfamiliar wagon rolled slowly up the road, pulled by a single tired horse. The driver sat hunched beneath a wide straw hat, his face hidden in shadow. Hana emerged from the garden, her hands still dusty from the earth. She froze when she saw the wagon, her breath catching audibly. The hat lifted, revealing an elderly Japanese man with a face as lined as a well-worn map. Cole had never seen Hana move so fast. She ran across the yard, her bare feet kicking up little puffs of dirt. The old man climbed down stiffly just in time to catch her as she threw herself into his arms. They stood that way for a long time, the old man murmuring in Japanese while Hana's shoulders shook silently. Cole hung back, suddenly feeling like an intruder on this private moment. When they finally separated, the old man turned to Cole. He spoke rapidly in Japanese, his wrinkled hands gesturing toward the fields. "I think he's asking about the ranch," Hana said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Cole nodded, motioning for them to follow. He led the way through rows of thriving vegetables, past fruit trees heavy with unseasonable bounty. The old man's eyes widened at each new wonder, his fingers brushing leaves and petals with reverence. At the center of the garden stood Hana's first plant, now a gnarled old bush that somehow produced different fruits each season. Today it bore strange purple berries Cole had never seen before. The old man plucked one carefully and popped it in his mouth. His eyes lit up as he began speaking excitedly to Hana. She turned to Cole. "My uncle. He thought I was dead. The men who took me, they burned our village. He searched for years." The old man reached into his sleeve and withdrew a small cloth bundle. Untying it carefully, he revealed a handful of shimmering seeds unlike anything on the ranch. He pressed them into Cole's palm, closing the rancher's fingers over them with both hands. No translation was needed. That evening, 3 generations sat around the kitchen table: Cole, Hana, and the uncle they now called Ajizan. The old man taught Cole how to properly steep green tea while Hana cooked a feast of combined American and Japanese dishes. Though they shared no common language, the house rang with laughter. In the years that followed, travelers would sometimes remark about the unusual sight: an old Japanese man tending plants alongside a grizzled rancher and his small, smiling wife. The ranch continued to thrive, its reputation spreading further each season. And whenever Cole encountered someone down on their luck, a drought-stricken farmer, a family who'd lost everything, he'd press $2 into their hand with the same whispered advice: invest wisely. Some took the money and bought livestock or seed. A rare few understood what Cole truly meant: that the most important investments weren't in things, but in people, in kindness, in believing in someone when no one else would. The original $2 bill from the auction stayed framed above the fireplace, its edges frayed, but its message clear. Not a receipt of purchase, but a reminder that from the smallest, most unlikely beginnings, the most extraordinary things can grow. The fields stretched green to the horizon. The kitchen always smelled of herbs and fresh bread. And every evening, as the sun set behind the hills, 3 figures could be seen walking the land together, their footsteps leaving no mark on the earth, but their legacy written deep in its soil.